You announced it,
Member
you're living
Stone's
through it,
expired.
and we'll have none of it.
I call the member for Balcombe Hills.
Thank you, Madam Acting Speaker. And I rise to make a modest contribution on the Public Sector Employment Management Amendment Bill. Fascinated at Mr Daly's just recent speech and his lecture in us on public sector administration, because I refer him to an article that was written recently by the Sun Herald, and they refer to his administration when he was the Finance Minister, and Mr Greg McCarthy, who was the Chairman of WorkCover, quoted Mr Daly as leaving the, quote, state's finances in a parlous state. So standing up here and receiving a lecture from Mr Daly on public sector administration is quite funny and as entertaining an event as I'll probably have today. Madam Acting Speaker, can I also remind the House that the Labor Party, true to form in government, we all remember them being economic rationalists. They sold Qantas, they sold the Commonwealth Bank, they sold lotteries. They're very good in government at selling public sector infrastructure and public sector assets and corporations, but in opposition they circle the wagons and they revert to their socialist mentality. So here in this place we would have all heard 2 years ago cries from Mr Daly and his then governing party about the need for us to bring in more efficient public sector employment strategies and public sector management, but now they're in opposition and they need to circle the wagons with their socialist allies. All of a sudden they become the workers' friend. Well, Madam Speaker, it doesn't wash with us here in New South Wales, and I dare say it doesn't wash with our friends up there in Queensland when you look at the result that these two political parties have received in the last 12 months. But Madam Acting Speaker, for too long the taxpayers of this state have been propping up a civil service so riddled with inefficiencies that it would make Sir Humphrey blush. Despite these inefficiencies, for the 16 years the Labor Party were in government, they actually shied away from essential public sector reform. They wanted to do it. I sat in meetings in my previous life with members of the opposition who begged us to support them in bringing in more efficient public sector reform. As an industry lobbyist and as an industry advocate, I was sitting side by side with them, helping them get through the union thuggery that they were facing. They wanted better public sector reform, but they couldn't do it. And in not doing it, they created a culture of waste and mismanagement unlike anything we have seen in this country. This bill places common sense back at the heart of the public sector in New South Wales. It drags the public sector in line with the rest of the community, because I can assure you, Madam Acting Speaker, if any of the organisations that I've been involved in my adult life were as inefficient as the New South Wales Labor government was, I don't think that I'd be able to stand here with all good conscience today and give this presentation to the House. So the bill will be ending some of the worst excesses of the previous government. Excesses that the member for Mount Druitt makes a very enlightened contribution, reminding us of all of the Labor Party's less than efficient offerings to this state. But we believe, unlike the member for Mount Druitt, that this bill will grant government department heads with the same authority and flexibility that any manager in business would expect. The bill's main reform is putting an end to the Labor Party policy of no forced redundancy in the public sector, and I'm sure it is clear that all members that such a ridiculous position invariably leads to the bloated and inefficient public sector that we've seen today. It's astounding that in this state we have had employees that we couldn't make redundant, even though they hadn't had a permanent position for up to a decade. It's a waste of taxpayers' money, and the people of New South Wales deserve better. Indeed, this bill will provide that excess employees can now be made redundant if a vacant permanent position is not available in the public sector. And any opposition from this legislation seen in the Labor Party are just crocodile tears, Madam Acting Speaker, because as I said, I know for a fact many members of that party, when they were in government, were indebted to the union movement to the extent that they couldn't get this reform through. They wanted it to come through, they couldn't do it. The scheme remains generous comparable to industry standards. An excess employee can only be made redundant if no permanent position exists across the entirety of the public service. Now, I don't think that you can get any fairer than that, Madam Acting Speaker. And if redeployment is not possible, the excess employee is offered a voluntary redundancy or 3-month period to seek redeployment. As the Premier said when introducing the bill, employees cannot be redeployed, they cannot be kept on the books indefinitely. The bill also clarifies that the Public Sector Employment and Management Act is the principal act in regards to public sector employment. To this end, the amendment removes the application of unfair contracts. The unfair contracts provisions of the Industrial Relations Act, and these provisions have been used in the past to prevent excess employees from being made redundant, even though such action was in the public interest. Being such a necessary reform, you would expect the opposition to be responsible and support the amendment, but unfortunately they have ignored the public interest again, reverted to form and decided to play partisan politics. The opposition leader's contribution to this debate was particularly disappointing. He claimed that this amendment was the end of redeployment being the primary means of dealing with excess staff in the public sector. He further claimed that this bill was an attack on nurses, teachers, police officers and other frontline services. If the opposition leader had bothered to read the bill, perhaps he would not have erred on these remarks. The bill makes clear that redundancies can only be made when redeployment is not possible. Further, nurses, teachers, police officers are exempt from under the bill. So overall, Madam Acting Speaker, this bill, I believe, will result in greater public sector efficiency and ultimately a better public service. I commend it to the House.
The question is that this bill be now